We are talking about Tigers Are Not Afraid from 2017, and I'm going to tell you what it was about. A dark fairy tale about a gang of 5 children trying to survive the horrific violence of the cartels and the ghosts created every day by the drug war, directed by Issa Lopez.
Yeah. Who's a new favorite. So I am an absolute sucker for magical realism. It is one of my favorite genres of anything. Like, I just really enjoy, weaving fantastical elements into very real trauma. And that's how we cope as creative human beings. Some of my favorites being, Toni Morrison, love her, Guillermo del Toro, which you've heard me talk about a lot, and Octavia Butler, and now Issa Lopez, because she did a great job. Tigers Are Not Afraid has been compared to Pan's Labyrinth by Guillermo del Toro, and I definitely see that comparison. Like, there are quite a few things that are kind of similar. And just that comparison is what piqued my interest in the beginning to even cover Tigers Are Not Afraid. Which,
that's a big compliment.
Yeah, and I mean, Guillermo has also talked about how much he loves and appreciates this film, which is such an honor, like I can't imagine. And that he really appreciates it. Something that I enjoyed about this was that, Issa is talking about Mexico and about what's happening there and how it's affecting the women and children. And one of my only gripes that I've ever had with Guillermo was that he often covers Spain and like the Spanish War and Spanish trauma, which is like fine. But the reason why we couldn't use him for any of our For the Culture or foreign horror, because he's Mexican, and don't want to
speak about issues in Mexico.
Yeah, which is like, you're allowed to speak about other issues. But like, no, I don't want to go on a rant about colonizers, but Spain is a colonizer. So, and we, when we talk about like South America, we get a lot of those like very light-skinned people being real racist to the Mayan looking people. And that's where some of my, angst comes from. But Issa is like filling that void that I was missing, where it was just like, you can tell these fantastical stories about like the wars and the traumas of children, and you can do it about like a place you're from. That's what she does. And, I love Pan's Labyrinth. It is one of my all-time favorite films. Every time
that's very good.
I revisit that piece, I am met with more to be impressed by, whether it's, the imagery or the depth or the acting or just the pain that's in there. Like, there's always something new where I'm like, oh, I didn't even think about that. And it's just like, it's charming in its own way and also very dark. And I think that makes it very unique and beautiful. And
for sure.
Like, I totally understand the comparisons, because there really is that, like, it is fantastical realism. It is Spanish, like you're speaking Spanish. Like, it's that there are some, comparisons to me, but I don't want to spend a lot of time doing that, because Tigers is its own. Like, it is so unique and so much her that I'm just going to like stop it there. The only other comparison I will make is another content warning, which is that both feature child death. And so just being warned.
And it was so sad.
Yeah. Like, heartbreaking. Like, child death in Pan's Labyrinth wasn't even as dramatic as it was here. Because this was like, what? What did you just do to me?
Yeah. It was so, it hit in a very visceral way, and that like the actors themselves reacted very viscerally, and I think that really added to it, but just the action of it taking place was really just wow.
Yeah. Well, like, these children were phenomenal actors. I definitely believed them the entire time and felt for them immediately. Not just because it's like kids on screen, because like, sometimes we see them and they're not great, but I would say like right behind like the kids from It, like these were really talented children that really were selling the story, and I believed their trauma. And Issa is like before this, she would do a lot of just like comedies. She worked in television, on like episodic features, and so it's just like this is totally like different from what she used to do, but it doesn't feel like it's not amateur hour by any means. It's very unique, and it has a voice throughout that I think that makes me excited for whatever else she decides to create, you know? There is an article in the LA Times titled "How Mexican Filmmaker Issa Lopez Defied Expectations with Tigers Are Not Afraid" by Carlos Aguilar. And he says, "Tigers Are Not Afraid was born out of her realization that entire areas of some Mexican cities have become ghost towns as people flee or disappear as cartel-related violence explodes. An unknown number of orphaned children have resulted as the collateral victims of the gruesome conflict." And I think, like, for her, and a lot of interviews that I found when I was kind of looking around, was that she very much wanted to highlight what was happening with this specific group of people, which is like children and women, because they are being neglected. Right, they're not getting like you said. It was hard to find stats, right? Like it's horrific numbers, like large numbers of just flat out missing people. Like America freaks out whenever we have like a serial killer, and you know, like it's like, oh, they killed like 10 people, really awful. It's like, okay, well, this girl's mom just up and disappeared. That's it.
America is just really like numbers only matter when they want them to matter. Like, COVID is 4,000 people a day.
Yeah.
So, they care when they care. They don't when they don't. And here we are.
Yeah, that's America. I think that Tigers Are Not Afraid is as much about the magic of youth as it is about growing up too fast, because the world is violent and broken, and you have to like, you got to get up or it's going to get you. Right? Like, and it's about coping with that in the way that children do. And that's where the fantastical elements come in. And I've really appreciated that, you know, taking place in Mexico, we get a glimpse like of this tattered country. Like we get into one of these ghost towns where the people are living on edge and they are forced to adapt to the instability and violence and like cope. Like we see it throughout that there is this resiliency in the wake of the pain and trauma that they're enduring, and just like a persistence, right, about living on and making do with whatever it is that they're given.
To still find happiness and like little moments of childhood and joy in this like horrific landscape. Yeah,
like you just you have to. And it has wonderful, fantastic elements. There's like a trickling line of blood that guides us through, like leads our protagonist to information or to places that she needs to go. And it kind of reminded me of video games, like specifically like when you're playing like in Dead Space, if you click a button, I think it's like R3, click it, it'll like light up, like there'll be a light and it'll like kind of point you and it'll be like, whoo.
Yeah. Okay.
You know,
and Ghost of Tsushima, there's wind that does that.
I think there's something, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think there's something in Witcher. But even like Cyberpunk, right? Like when you're looking at your map and you have that yellow line that leads you to where you need to go. That's what it made me think of. So it was kind of like a game. There's a little black dragon that like comes out of the girl's phone and then goes back into the phone. There's a sweet little stuffed tiger that communicates with us in warning and in mourning. And is a vocal piece for a character that didn't voice his pain. And for me, like each and every one of these elements is an attempt at reasoning a world that doesn't make sense. That like isn't structured. It isn't following the laws that we were supposed to believe in. And it's hopeful, and it does bring little moments of joy when we're watching it sometimes. Like when Estrella tempts the boys with the vision of a zoo that has a football field and a palace, like place that they could run away to. And then they find one, right? Of course, like the zoo is that aquarium broke, and now there's like fish like struggling to survive in this little place. The football field is really just a room that's full of soccer balls. They have like a theater that's emptied that they do their little talent show. And it's just like, and the palace, you know, is this old decrepit building that's just in the middle of nowhere. And it's their own little oasis for a short, blissful moment so that the kids can actually be kids, which we don't get to see a lot. Like, or when we do, it's really like, I said it in the beginning, I was like, this hits heavy already, because when she's like walking from the school, there's a caution tape off place and the kids are playing in there, and I was like, this is really heavy-handed. Like,
they're playing limbo with a caution tape for someone who was killed.
And it was like, here is this dichotomous world where there's violence and pain and also child joy because they have to do it, right? There's an article in the New Yorker called "The Haunted Street Children of Tigers Are Not Afraid" by Anthony Lane, and he says, her film is forever suggesting that the urge to tell stories about oneself and the nourishing virtues of play can be a means of survival. Some kids lark around with crime scene tape yards away from a body on the sidewalk. Others burn a discarded grand piano for fun. Shine and his crew hole up in what was once a fancy house where ornamental fish, freed from their tank, still dart about in a puddle on the concrete floor. Upstairs, the lads enjoy a game of soccer, inking numbers on one another's bare backs with a permanent marker to make up for want of t-shirts. Because it's like, you know, kids are resilient at the end of the day. Like, this is what they're gonna do. Like, they're gonna find joy and they're gonna allow themselves that joy. And I think that is a strength that adults don't always have, which makes this story very unique, because we can get a glimpse into a very intimate and vulnerable space because it's through the eyes of children. I think one of the most impactful scenes, and one that set the tone for what this film was going to be, is when Estrella is at school. And she's been living at home alone and is just kind of going through her routine and holding on to like the comfort and habit. And she continues all the way to the point where she continues to go to school. And you think, like, as like American kids, you would think like, oh, like, you know, oh, we don't ever want to go to school. If your parents weren't home, you wouldn't go to school, you know? But for me personally, that struck as someone who's had like a dark history and difficult childhood, that there were many times where not going to school was an option, or like there was things going on where it was like, you can't go to school, where I went to school because that was my escape. That was my oasis. And it was normal. Like, it was like, I can go, I can focus on studying. I can see my friends. I can look at the board and just for a few hours, not be aware of what's happening elsewhere.
It was like the one thing that was normal. Like, it was not chaotic in any way. Like, you knew what to expect. Like, I tried to like live at school as much as I could. I was like, clubs, whatever lets me stay here longer and does not make me go home. It was definitely a safe space. There's
like a comfort in the mundanity of it, right? It's just like, this is routine. I just do it and I don't have to think, you know, and I don't have to
sometimes
stress.
That's your one like safe person too, is at school. Like, sometimes you have like a teacher who, if you know, they're the ones that you can really like have a guardian figure kind of like in your life, even if they don't like get to go home with you. Like, they are maybe the person that like is your safe person.
Like, they're the ones who believe in you too, and like push you to do what maybe you just didn't believe you could. And I found that like at the beginning, the school is that for Estrella. Like, she goes there and there is joy, and the teacher starts them off with like they have to make their own fairy tale with princes and palaces and tigers, and it's cute, right? Because it also shows you how young that she is, right? That we're doing fairy tales in school, and the joy is in imagination is immediately cut short when we hear gunshots outside. And so then they have to, get on the ground. And I think about like even our youth right now who live in that similar fear with school shootings where, they have experienced that trauma. They experienced that fear. There was like a tweet that I saw recently because of the Capitol where it was like a young girl tweeted at like a congressperson and was just like, oh, was that scary? Did you have to hide under your desk? Like, that happened to me 3 times, and I haven't even gotten to high school yet. Like, those kinds of things, like, like, the reality that we have been ignoring even here. But she's, like, we are immediately, like, cut into what is happening in this world with those gunshots, and they're down, and the teacher, is trying to hold on to some semblance of, not happiness, but trying to help her cope and distract her. And so she gives her 3 pieces of chalk and says, like, you can make wishes on them. And similar to the monkey's paw, although her wishes come true, they come at a steep price.
Yeah.
And it is this question of like, are these her wishes coming true, or did those wishes happen and it's her way of justifying them?
Yeah. Like her way of like coping with what's happening in front of her.
Yeah, like internalizing them. And I think like, just like the hard and violent life outdoors, this story doesn't have a happily ever after, but more of a to be continued, because Estrella is going to either continue to persevere and fight through and grow up, or she will die. Like those are the only options. And it's just like this film, it really just is a downer to say the least. But in a way that I think opens you up emotionally. And it, that scene is what kicks us off into the world. So, one of her havens is closed. The school gets closed. And then Estrella is then forced to leave her home because she is hungry and her mother's not there. And she is forced to break each piece of chalk to grant those wishes, ultimately. Like, she can't even hold on to those.
Yeah.
So the horror elements in this film kind of reminded me of Crimson Peak. And again, I don't want to compare her to Del Toro, but I also brought Crimson Peak up in Impetigore, so it's safe. But in that same way is like, there's like creepy, scary things that are kind of silly. Like in Crimson Peak, they weren't really scary, but they were also kind of scary. Like it was like they're what you would imagine someone is personifying as something scary. And these definitely felt like a kid that is disassociating and projecting monsters into reality. And like, I didn't feel like they were so scary as much as like the environment was scary and what was happening was scary. And even so, like, there was a comfort in them too, because you didn't know if you should trust them because they were also helping. Yeah. Like, they also warned her and like protected her at times. So it's like, what are these? Should we be afraid of them? What is it? Which I really enjoyed. And I think like all magical realism, we have like a fictional and a fantastical explanation for the events. And then we have the blunt, unapologetic reality, right? And Estrella is haunted by a mysterious woman who at first seems dangerous to her and then later is like prophetic and protective and is her mother. Yeah. And it's like, we didn't even know that, right? Like, so, and it's like, what is that really? Like, at the end, is it just her ability to, try to protect herself and persevere? Or, is she really seeing a ghost? Yeah. Right? Like, I love the kind of tales where you can believe either. Yeah. Our little crew of protagonists are these resilient and lovable kids. They are the best and most heartbreaking part of this film. Yeah. Because you love them immediately.
Well, yeah, they're just so cute and they're dancing. They're just like little kids. And they're like finding those little minutes of joy. And it's so hard to watch. It's so sad.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even like when you're introduced to Shine, right? He is doing graffiti on the wall of the tiger, and he follows the the man from the cartel, and you like all you know is that there's this kid.
Yeah.
And then he picks up this gun and he's gonna shoot this guy. And it's like, what? That's a child. And that's like the first time you meet him, right?
Yeah.
And then it the rest of it is like we see there's this other side to him. Like each one of them is charming and soft and broken for some reason. Like something has happened to them. We learn about their traumas as we progress in the story. Moro, which is like the biggest heart piece of this, is the youngest of the crew. He's adorable and nonverbal, and he experienced something so awful that he's never spoke again.
Yeah.
Like since then. Shine, like we learn about him that he is holding on to this phone that is putting them in danger ultimately. But that he can't let it go, and that he's so connected to it because it has the only picture of his mother on it.
Yeah. No,
that he has.
I loved his character probably. I loved Moro too, but he was my favorite because he really just had to like grow up, and he was the oldest of this little group, and he like was trying to be like act as the oldest. Like he grew up so fast and is just trying to like keep some semblance of normalcy for him and his friends. And he's trying to be so strong. And it's so like, spoilers, but like the end hurt me in such like I wanted him to be okay. And when he wasn't, I was just like, oh.
Yeah. Well, and because he strives to protect them. And this is his own little family. There's a lot of like in some of the articles that I was reading, there's often a comparison to Peter Pan, right? So like he's Peter Pan, she's Wendy, and these are the Lost Boys.
Yeah.
We are all we have. We've made our own little community, our own little family, and we protect each other. And it's very clear that that's it, right? Like that they made their own family with each other and are as much like brothers as anything else. And he is, the pseudo father and she's a pseudo mother in this circumstance of like taking care of them and guiding them. And that's why it's so heartbreaking when we lose some of them. And it's just, I think they're very deliberate and beautifully crafted as characters. Anthony Lane from The New Yorker, which I mentioned earlier in this article, also says, every time I make a wish, something really bad happens, Estrella says. The phantasmal, in other words, offers no respite. It is simply part of the detritus that litters the townscape, making it that much easier for the residents who are all too accustomed, God knows, to a ruined reality, to escape the imagined as true. What's more, there will always be times when the visions run dry, and even the imagination gives up the ghost. As Shine says to Estrella, there are no wishes, there's nothing, not even tigers, we're all there is. And in the end, we are confronted with the sharp reality of the world, that there is no real escape from the pain and suffering, and that Estrella will grow in this ghost town, or she will die. Like the many other children who are lost in the shadows of this war that they have no part in. Yeah.
And you do get to see like the little like naivety of like these young kids, because when they try to take the phone to the police officer and the police officer just rolls up the windows and runs away.
Like, well, because they say, do you see who's in there? Because it's a politician. That's how deep it goes.
Yeah. But like, you get like this naivety of the kids, like thinking it is safe to do that, and it's not.
Well, yeah, like he one of the kids, I can't remember which one it was, one of the side character, like the other kids was like, this is a bad thing happening. So who brings justice when a bad thing happens? And Shine says, not the police.
Yeah.
And then they like go to the police, and of course the police are like, who do you see who's on there? Like, we can't get involved in that. And it's like, that one little scene was enough to show us like how deep it runs. Because now we know that this villain, the penultimate villain, is this, this politician who we've seen his face all over town, who claims that he's going to clean it up, but he's the one who's doing it. Like, he's the biggest monster of them all. And so, for a fact that there's no getting out of it. And the fact that the police know that too, like, this is just, it's over, right? It is that corrupt. I think there's, an element to it where, in your section where you talked about how she said, there's like a romancing even of the cartel bosses. Yeah. And I think that El Chino had that too. Like there was a swagger and like a confidence that he had. Like no one's going to defeat me. That's how high I am. And definitely not children. Look how many I just kill all the time. There's a whole room full of the people I killed. I don't know their names. I don't know which one it is. How am I supposed to know where your mother is? And like the audacity of that, like the power that he has and cockiness. And it was a really traumatizing villain.
Yeah. He was, that little ending was probably one of the, and I thought child being eaten was the worst thing I had ever seen. And then when I saw like him attacking the children, I was like, oh God, no, this is living forever in my brain. I'm just going to be sad.
Yeah. And it's like, for me, I had like a horrible thought when, the awful happens where, it's like he wished for the scar to be gone, and it was. Yeah. It was replaced with a new one, but it was. And I was just like, it's such a twist of the fantasy that that's what happened, right? It's like, oh, you think you're working with magic? Well, the magic is evil too. Yeah. And that really hit me and affected me in such, phenomenal film.